again, everybody. This is Doc with Thorofan, and well, over the last week or so, we certainly did have the circus that was the NYRA hearing into denying Baffert any kind of privileges to either stable on the grounds or run in races at any of the NYRA tracks. And it's certainly not going to be the last hearing that Baffert, I'm sure, is involved in over the coming months here as we go forward. But one hearing that we have all been waiting for a long time and is finally going to be happening in the next week or so is the hearing into the disqualification of Medina Spirit from the Kentucky Derby. That's right, way back in May of 2021. And this all stemmed from a positive result of betamethasone being found in a post-race sample of Medina Spirit, and Baffert and his legal team are arguing that it was not betamethasone acetate that you would see in injecting joints or anything like that, but rather something called betamethasone valerate, which is found in a product called Otamax, which is a topical cream that was being used on Medina Spirit for a fungal skin infection. So the big question, I think, on everybody's mind is that after all of this separate testing, after all the legal arguments as far as whether certain things could be tested again and split samples and all of that, how did they exactly determine that it was betamethasone valerate and not betamethasone acetate that was in that sample? And that supposedly is what being alleged or confirmed by the defense after a whole bunch of testing was done. So I'm going to try to give my best guess as to how they went about doing this, and it kind of gives an overview of how they developed tests for certain compounds in racehorses. So why don't we all get ready to dig a little deeper as I sit down and discuss with all of you testing for betamethasone in racehorses. So I'm going to preface a lot of this by saying I don't have any inside information or inside knowledge as to exactly how all of these procedures and protocols were done to determine that it was truly betamethasone valerate and all of those results were validated and all of that stuff. I'm going to kind of give what we call kind of a 30,000, 40,000 foot overview of how a majority of substances are, run through the research process to determine how they may affect a horse or how they may be detected in a horse later on. And that's kind of the process that we're going to go through here. So the first question when it comes to this particular type of betamethasone is, has it ever been studied before in horses? Has there ever been any research projects done to determine how it is metabolized, how it is processed in the horse, and how it is found later in potentially blood or urine samples? I couldn't find anything specific on that. All of the research does seem to focus on the betamethasone acetate, which is what you find in the injectable forms that they use for joint injections and things like that. So that is probably one of the main reasons for the delay in them being able to do the testing on the split sample looking for this particular compound. It's because the research prior really wasn't there. And that seems to be what they're hinting at from what some of the vets and the testing experts have said in this whole process. So if there's no previous research or parameters out there, well, the first thing you've got to do is determine, can you even detect this substance or its metabolites in a horse after a certain period of time? So that takes time. There's only one way to do it, and that is to actually take a couple of horses, hopefully a good sample size, and apply this Otamax in the way that it probably was applied to Medina Spirit every day for a certain period of days, or however they wanted to structure this study. And then each day taking blood and urine samples from those horses. And it may be every couple of hours to start as they look for it to see if there's absorption there. So if the compound is absorbed and it is kind of metabolized then through the body, what they're looking for in these blood or urine samples is, one, can they actually find the substance? Do they think it might metabolize into a different substance that they then can test for? And three, what are those levels? And then what would be considered the normal levels that you would see in blood and urine after a certain period of time of that substance being administered? So if we step back for a second and we take a look at Lasix, since everybody kind of understands Lasix, what they know now is that if you inject a certain amount of Lasix into the vein of a horse, after a certain amount of time of being metabolized through the body and all of that, there is a certain amount of that drug or its metabolite that they know will be present in the horse to be found in blood or urine so many hours after it's administered. So that's been done through multiple testing. It's the same sort of thing here. What they had to do was determine first that they could find the substance, which it does appear that they were able to do, And then they had to do kind of testing to determine exactly what parameters or what measurement levels to look for it at, depending on the time frame of when it was allegedly administered to when the testing was done. And this can take a couple of months to do as well too, because they have to not only do this test, but they have to make sure that they've validated it to show that all the science is correct, all the machines were calibrated properly, and it's kind of a repeatable thing. So you have to be able to get a fairly consistent level of that drug in the system on each test run to show that your results are basically valid. So this sounds like what they were doing at another lab where they were really researching this, I'm assuming in a group of horses, to find out the exact levels. Now, after all of that was taken care of and done, that lab then kind of developed and said, okay, if Otemax is being given in this manner, this much, and it was given 48, 72 hours was the last dose before the testing was done, you should be able to find this amount of the drug or its metabolite in the horse's urine or blood when you take that test. And it's those numbers that then the lab in New York used to calibrate their machinery to look for that specific substance. So that seems to be how they kind of linked all of this together. Again, this is presumption on my part. Nobody really knows the exact process and procedure, but this is what I'm going off of, and this is what I think they did. So from the time they were able to go ahead and get those values, validate them, those numbers were then transferred over to the New York lab, where then they ran the specific testing for beta-methazone valerate or its metabolites. Again, I'm not sure what they were going off of, on the actual split sample of Medina Spirit's urine and blood. And that's supposedly where they were able to determine that they did find just the beta-methazone valerate and not the beta-methazone acetate. They are able to do that with testing equipment to look at the different molecular structures and all of that. Again, I'm not going to get into it. It's much too detailed for this type of discussion. So that appears to be the way that they did it and how they're going to justify it. Again, I'm going to say nobody knows for sure. The veterinarian and the director of the New York lab has not come out publicly and said exactly how all of the testing procedures were done and how the results were validated. He was not called as a witness in the NYRA hearings, so no, we were kind of wondering if that would happen to see if he would go into that a little bit. He's obviously going to have to be called as an expert witness in the Kentucky case, because he's going to have to be able to validate all of the information there for them to show that the science is correct. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with that. We're not exactly sure yet either if it's going to be just a steward's hearing or a hearing in front of the entire Horse Racing Commission on this issue. So there may be further appeals of this where more information comes out. But I hope that kind of helps explain a little bit of the process of how we go from just kind of administering a substance to a horse, first being able to determine if we can detect it or any of its metabolites in blood or urine after a certain period of time administration, what those normal values will be in finding those substances specifically, and then seeing if it correlates to the samples that were taken from a horse that whose performance or drug test was in question. It's a long process. It's a process that happens with every single substance that we then test for post-race or pre-race in a horse, which is why, as we always say, the cheaters in a lot of ways are always going to be one step ahead of the chemists, because we can't test for something, or the labs, I should say, can't test for something they don't know about. They need the substance in hand to be able to then first develop a test for it and then determine how it's reactive in the horse and other things that they may look for as far as, again, the metabolites or the breakdown products of that substance in testing. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this hearing plays out. Of course, I don't think it's going to be open to the public or potentially even the media, especially if it's a steward's hearing. They are not. So we may not get a whole bunch of information until the hearing is over, and maybe we can get some information as to what was testified in the hearing, or if a ruling is appealed, perhaps then maybe some more information will come out. But until that time, we're just going to have to wait and see exactly what happens, and hope that all of the science is correct, and that decisions are made based on what the legal rules state were in effect at the time and what the science says on there. And that's all we can really hope for when it comes to these rulings. So if you do have any other questions about this, feel free to drop them down in the comments section. I will try to answer them. If you have any information that might be helpful to all of us in understanding more of the process, I'd be happy to learn about that too. You certainly can drop that down in the comments or drop us a line at Thorofan as well. So this is Doc for Thorofan. Hope everybody is staying warm and dry this winter, especially with all the storms that are out there. And always remember that for the only place you need to go to find out the most up-to-date and accurate information about horse racing for the racing fan, from the racing fan, the place you want to go is Thorofan.